I still remember the sound of the door that night. It didn't slam. No, it was quieter than that. It clicked shut, soft and final, like the closing of a chapter that I hadn't finished reading. That's how he left me. Not in anger, not in noise, but in silence. And somehow, that hurt more than any goodbye ever could. I stood there by the window, holding the curtain with trembling fingers, watching the taillights fade down the old cobblestone lane. The rain had just begun to fall, thin and cold, like the sky was mourning with me. I whispered his name once, just to hear it echo in the empty house. But even my own voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. People think heartbreak comes all at once, but it doesn't, my dear. It comes in waves. It seeps into the quiet moments. When you're pouring tea for two, but only one cup gets filled, or when his chair at the table looks too perfectly empty. That night, I sat in the kitchen for hours, tracing the grain of the wooden table where he used to drum his fingers when he was restless. I could still smell his cologne, faint, stubborn, lingering in the air. Funny, isn't it, how a scent can haunt you longer than a person ever could. He had been distant for months, though I pretended not to notice. You learn to ignore small silences when you love someone. You convince yourself they're just tired, or preoccupied, or that love changes shape as the years pass. But deep down, I knew he was slipping away like a photograph left too long in the sun, fading slowly until the edges disappear. The night before he left, he told me he was meeting an old friend for dinner. I smiled and kissed his cheek, pretending not to feel the tremor in my chest. I ironed his shirt for him. The blue one, he said, made him look younger. I didn't know he'd be wearing it to say goodbye to the woman he'd found instead of me. The next morning, his side of the bed was cold, and by evening, his suitcase was gone. No letter, no note, just the absence, heavy and cruel. I aged 10 years in that single day. People came by, of course, neighbors with kind eyes and too many questions. They brought casseroles and pity, both of which I had no appetite for. I told them he was traveling for work, that he'd be back. But even as I spoke the lie, I could feel it breaking in my throat. My dear, before I continue, if this story has touched your heart even a little, do subscribe and stay with me through the end. Some stories aren't meant to be rushed. They unfold like old letters, one tear-stained page at a time. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. I learned the language of silence. I spoke to the walls. I watered the roses he'd planted. I even laughed once, and then felt guilty for it, as if joy was betrayal. I found out about her by accident. A friend of a friend saw them in town, her hand resting on his arm, her smile bright and careless. She was younger. Of course she was. She had the kind of beauty that doesn't yet know how cruel time can be. I stared at her photograph for a long time, tracing the outline of her face with my fingertip, wondering what she had that I no longer did. Was it youth? Or was it simply that she wasn't me? You see, my dear, men often chase mirrors of their own lost time. He wasn't leaving me for her. He was running away from the version of himself that had grown older beside me. I didn't cry the day I saw her. Not really. I just exhaled, like something heavy had been sitting on my chest for too long. And then I went into our bedroom, sat at the edge of the bed and whispered, "Go then, be happy. But don't you dare come back when the laughter fades." The house became a museum of our life. His slippers by the fireplace, his book half open on the nightstand. I couldn't bring myself to move them. It felt like desecrating a memory. But memory, my dear, has claws. One evening, as the light dimmed and the wind sang through the cracks of the old house, I heard something. A creak in the hallway. I turned, and for a fleeting second, I thought. I saw him standing by the doorway, watching me. My heart leapt, but it was only the shadow of the curtain. Still, I whispered, "Is that you?" And then I laughed at myself. An old fool in an empty house. But maybe that's what love does. It makes ghosts out of people who are still alive. Months later, I received a letter. His handwriting. Unmistakable. My hands trembled as I opened it. He said he was sorry. That he hadn't meant for it to end this way. That he'd found someone who reminded him of what it felt like to be young. He wrote that he hoped I'd understand. That I'd forgive him. Forgive him? I remember clutching that letter until the paper tore. I remember whispering to the walls, "You broke my heart in pursuit of your own youth, and you want me to forgive you." But then the silence answered back, and I realized forgiveness wasn't for him. It was for me, because the truth was, he had taken something from me that I didn't know how to rebuild. My reflection. I stopped looking in mirrors for months. I couldn't bear to see the lines around my eyes or the silver in my hair. Every mark felt like evidence that I was the woman he left behind. But pain, my dear, is a strange sculptor. It chisels you into shapes you never thought you could be. The days grew quieter. I began to read again, to hum while I cleaned. I even planted new roses by the window. Not the kind he liked, but the kind that bloomed late and stubbornly, even when the frost came early. I think part of me hoped he'd see them one day and know that I was still here. Not waiting, not hoping, just existing, stronger, softer, older, and free. But fate has its own cruel poetry. One evening, almost a year later, I saw a familiar figure outside my gate. He was standing there, looking uncertain, like a man lost in a memory. His hair was grayer, his shoulders lower, and beside him, no one. He had come back, and though my heart leapt at the sight of him, I stayed still behind the curtain, watching him through the glass. He looked older than I remembered, as if life had drained the color from him. His eyes searched the windows, perhaps hoping I'd appear, perhaps dreading that I would. He knocked, once, twice, then silence. I didn't open the door. My dear, tell me, have you ever had someone return after breaking you and found that you no longer recognize the love you once begged for? Because in that moment, I realized something I never thought I'd say. I didn't hate him. I didn't love him. I simply pitied him. He walked away that night, again. But this time, it was me who closed the door. And for the first time, I felt the weight lift. The house didn't echo anymore. The silence wasn't empty. It was peaceful. But that wasn't the end. Oh no, my dear. That night was only the beginning of the story. Because life, in its quiet wisdom, had one last secret left for me. One that would make me question everything I thought I knew about him. And myself. The morning after he came and left again, I brewed my tea the way I always did. 1 spoon of sugar, a dash of milk, and silence for company. The cup was chipped at the rim, just slightly, the way it had been for years. I never replaced it. Some things you see become part of your story, not because they're perfect, but because they've survived with you. I sat by the window and watched the sun climb lazily over the garden. The roses I'd planted stood proud, their petals kissed by dew. I thought of him, of the man I once believed would grow old beside me, and for the first time, my heart didn't twist. It simply sighed. A week passed before I received the second letter. It came without a return address, tucked neatly inside a brown envelope, with my name written in his handwriting, though shakier now, as if his hands had forgotten steadiness. Ruth, it began. I stood outside your house the other night. I knew you were there. I could feel you watching. I don't blame you for not opening the door. You shouldn't have. I wouldn't have, if I were you. He wrote that the woman he'd left me for was gone. Not gone as in left him, gone as in gone. She had fallen ill, and he had spent the last year watching the very thing he'd chased. Youth, beauty, vitality, slip away from her eyes. He said he'd learned that love isn't in the smoothness of skin or the brightness of a smile, but in the quiet comfort of someone who remembers how you take your tea or which side of the bed you sleep on. He wrote that he'd thought of me every day, that the scent of lavender reminded him of my hair, that he wished he could undo everything. I read that letter again and again until the words blurred into each other. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat there, feeling the weight of what could have been and what never would be again. I folded the letter neatly and placed it inside my old wooden box, the one I kept under my bed, filled with the ghosts of our life together. There were photographs, dried flowers, ticket stubs from seaside trips, and little notes he'd written me when we were still young enough to believe that love could fix anything. That night, I dreamed of him. We were back in the old cottage by the sea, where we'd spent our first summer as newlyweds. He was laughing, that boyish laugh I hadn't heard in decades. And I was sitting on the porch steps, brushing sand from my feet. He turned to me and said, "You'll always be the one, Ruth." But when I reached out to touch him, he was gone, replaced by the sound of the waves pulling away. When I woke, my pillow was damp with tears. My dear, sometimes memories are crueler than the pain itself. They remind you of who you used to be, and that person feels like a stranger wearing your skin. A few days later, I went into town. I hadn't been there in months. The shopkeepers still recognized me. Their smiles were polite, kind, curious. As I walked past the bakery, I caught a glimpse of myself in the window reflection. My hair was fully silver now, the lines around my mouth deeper, but there was something new in my face too. Something steady, something peaceful. That's when I realized I had aged into the woman he always wanted. Not because I had changed for him, but because I had survived him. I had become strong where he had broken, gentle where he had turned bitter. Aging isn't a loss, my dear. It's an evolution. A few weeks after that, I received another letter. But this one wasn't from him. It was from a lawyer. The name printed on the envelope made my breath catch. It was his. He had passed away. They said he had left something for me. I remember sitting there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hand, trying to understand how it was possible to mourn someone twice. Once when they left you, and once when they left the world. I went to his solicitor's office on a cloudy afternoon. The air smelled of rain and old paper. The man handed me a small parcel, square, carefully wrapped, tied with a piece of twine. Inside was a pocket watch. His pocket watch. The same one he used to carry everywhere. The one that clicked softly whenever he'd wind it at night. And taped to the back was a small note in his handwriting. Time was never ours, Ruth. But love. Love always was. I sat there, holding that watch, listening to the faint ticking, and realized that forgiveness had already happened without me noticing. Not because he deserved it, but because I did. I had carried his betrayal long enough. It was time to put it down. My dear, before I continue, if this story has found a small corner in your heart, do stay with me. There's more I need to tell you. About how the years that followed weren't just filled with sorrow, but with a strange kind of peace that only time can bring. For months after his death, I kept that watch on the mantle. It didn't tell the right time anymore. It always stopped at 11:17, the same moment he'd walked out that night years ago. I never fixed it. Some things, I believe, are meant to stay broken, as reminders of what we survived. But one evening, something strange happened. I came downstairs to find the watch ticking again. It startled me at first. That soft rhythm I hadn't heard in years. I thought perhaps the warmth of the fire had stirred it, or perhaps something else had. It ticked for exactly 1 minute, then stopped, and I smiled. Not in sadness, in understanding, because maybe, just maybe, some goodbyes never really end. They just change shape. Now when I sit by the window with my tea, I think of him, not with anger, not even regret, but with a gentle kind of gratitude. He taught me that love doesn't always last forever, but it does leave echoes. And sometimes, those echoes become the music that carries you through the quiet years. My dear, tell me, have you ever forgiven someone who broke your heart? Not because they asked you to, but because you finally learned how to love yourself more than the pain they left behind. If you have, then you'll understand what I mean when I say this. I didn't lose him that night. I found myself. And that, my dear, is the beginning of how I aged into the woman he always wanted. Not the one he imagined, but the one who learned to love her reflection again, because sometimes the most beautiful revenge is peace. It's strange, my dear, how a house can hold on to someone long after they're gone. For years I thought it was just me keeping him alive in my thoughts. The way I'd pause at the staircase, where his laughter used to echo, or how I'd open the window in the morning because he loved the smell of rain on the garden. But as time went on, I began to wonder if the house remembered him too. You see, this old English house wasn't just wood and stone. It was the keeper of everything. We were. The joy, the arguments, the apologies whispered into pillows. Every corner had a story, every floorboard a sigh. After his death, I decided to finally go through the attic. I hadn't been up there in years. The air was thick with dust and old secrets, and the light that slipped through the small window painted everything in a soft, golden haze. I opened an old trunk, one I didn't even remember owning. Inside were things I had forgotten existed, a pair of his cufflinks, a faded photograph of us by the sea, and a stack of letters tied with ribbon. But the letters weren't from him to me. They were from him to someone else. At first, I couldn't breathe. My fingers trembled as I untied the ribbon. The handwriting was his, but the tone was different, younger, reckless. In the first letter, he called her my light. In the second, he spoke of dreams, of leaving, of finding a place where love could begin again without the weight of old promises. The dates were from before he left me, months before, and just like that, the wound I thought had healed cracked open again. But this time, I didn't cry. I just sat there, surrounded by the dust of the past, reading each word like a woman studying a map of someone else's heart. He had written things to her that he never said to me. Words too tender, too desperate, and yet, buried between those sentences, I could feel his confusion, his guilt, as if even in those stolen moments, he knew he was building a future on a foundation of lies. At the bottom of the trunk was a small envelope addressed to me. I opened it carefully, afraid the paper might crumble in my hands. Ruth, it said, if you ever find this, it means the truth has made its way back home. I never wanted to hurt you, but I did. And for that, I'll spend the rest of my life remembering the sound of your silence that night. I walked away. You deserved a man, not a coward. You were always my anchor, even when I pretended I didn't need one. I closed the letter and stared at it for a long time. For years, I had wondered if he ever felt remorse. And now I knew he did. But he carried it quietly, the way I carried my pain, We were two ghosts haunting the same memory. My dear, before I go on, if this story still has your heart, stay with me a little longer. Some truths take time to unfold. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt different, heavier, somehow. The wind pressed against the windows like it was trying to speak. I went downstairs and made tea, the way I always did when my thoughts refused to rest. As I stirred the cup, I looked around the kitchen and noticed something strange, a faint outline on the wall where a picture frame used to hang. I hadn't taken anything down in years, but when I looked closer, I saw faint nail marks, as though something had been removed hastily. My curiosity stirred, and I went searching through the drawers, the cupboards, until I found it, the missing photograph. Tucked away in the back of the pantry, it was a picture of him and me, taken early in our marriage. I was laughing, my hair undone by the wind, and he was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen in decades. Not just love, but awe, that quiet admiration that only exists in the beginning, before life starts pulling people apart. On the back of the photo, written in his hand, were the words, "For the woman who made me believe in forever." Even when I failed her, my knees weakened. I sat right there on the kitchen floor, the photograph pressed against my chest, and for the first time in years, I let myself remember him. Not the man who left, but the man who once loved me like I was the only thing that made sense. It's easy to hate someone when the pain is fresh, but when time softens the edges, all that's left are fragments of what was good. That night, I left the photograph on the mantel beside the pocket watch. I whispered, "You're forgiven," not for him to hear, but for the house to know, because I think, somehow, it needed to. The next morning, I woke to find the scent of lavender in the air. Strong, sudden, and strange. The windows were closed, the air was still, and yet it was there. His scent. I smiled. Maybe it was the house remembering too. My dear, tell me, do you believe that places remember love? That walls absorb laughter? Or that silence holds on to old goodbyes? I used to think memories lived only in our hearts, but now I'm not so sure, because sometimes when I walk through this old house, I can still feel him, not the man who left me, but the one who promised to stay. The day I found the letter beneath the floorboards, it wasn't because I was looking for anything. I had stopped searching years ago. It was early morning. The sky outside was the color of pewter, and the house was quiet. That kind of deep silence that only comes after a night of rain. I was dusting the hallway, humming an old tune he used to play on the piano. When I reached the corner by the stairs, one of the floorboards gave a hollow sound beneath my foot. It startled me. I'd walked that same path every day for decades, but that sound, that soft, empty echo, felt new. I knelt down, pressed my hand against the board, and felt a faint gap at the edge. The wood lifted slightly, just enough to slide my fingers under. I hesitated. Something inside me whispered, "Leave it," but curiosity, that old stubborn friend of mine, refused to listen. Beneath the plank was a small envelope, yellowed with age, tied with a thin piece of ribbon that had once been red. My name was written across it in his familiar handwriting, but it looked older, perhaps written long before he'd left. My breath caught in my throat. For a long time, I simply stared at it, afraid that opening it would undo all the peace I had fought so hard to find. But then I thought, the past doesn't disappear by ignoring it. It waits, patiently, quietly, until you're ready to face it. So I opened it. Inside were 3 pages, folded neatly. The first was dated June 14th, 1982. That was the summer before he started pulling away. "Ruth," it began, "if you ever find this, I hope time has been kind to you. I don't know if I deserve to have these words read, but there are things I never knew how to say out loud. You've always seen through me, through the smiles, through the silence. You knew I was changing long before I did, and I hated that. Not because you were wrong, but because you were right. I read on, my hands trembling. I met someone, he confessed. You'll know who, if this ever reaches you, but she isn't what you think. She was a distraction, a reflection of the man I wanted to still be. She reminded me of the younger me, the one who didn't yet know regret. I thought loving her would make me feel alive again, but every time she laughed, I heard your voice beneath it. Every time she smiled, I saw your face behind hers. I was chasing ghosts, Ruth. Yours mostly. I stopped reading there for a moment. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. My dear, have you ever realized that someone's betrayal was never truly about you, but about the parts of themselves they couldn't face? I kept reading. I know I'll hurt you, he wrote. I know one day I'll leave, but not because I stopped loving you, because I never learned how to love myself the way you did me. You loved me too well, Ruth. You made it too easy to be small. And instead of growing, I ran. If I could go back, I'd tell you this. You were never the reason I left. You were the reason I stayed as long as I did. I pressed the letter to my chest and let out a sound I didn't know I'd been holding inside. A sound that was part sob, part relief. For years I'd believed I wasn't enough, that I'd grown old and dull. That time had stolen what he wanted. But the truth was, he hadn't left because I'd changed. He'd left because he hadn't. At the bottom of the envelope, I found a small folded photograph, one I'd never seen before. It was of me, sitting in the garden with the roses blooming behind me. He must have taken it secretly. On the back, in his familiar scrawl, he'd written, "She'll never know it, but this is the woman I'll spend my life trying to find again." I sat there for hours, my dear. The light shifted from gold to grey, and I just sat, holding that letter, that photograph, and the memory of a man I no longer hated. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't always come with understanding. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet acceptance, the kind that simply says, "It happened and I survived." When evening came, I placed the letter in the box with all the others, but this one I tied with a new ribbon, white, not red, not for purity, not for peace, but because white felt like closure. That night, I lit a candle by the window, the same window I had stood beside when he first left. The rain had started again, gentle, rhythmic, like a lullaby. I whispered into the night, "Thank you for loving me, even if you didn't know how." And somewhere in that stillness, I felt something shift, not in the air, but inside me. It was as though the house itself sighed, as though it too had been waiting for me to find that letter, to let it all go. From that day on, the house didn't feel haunted anymore. The echoes had softened. The memories didn't sting. The silence became something else entirely. A kind of companion, warm and patient. My dear, before I continue, if this story has touched your soul in any way, do stay with me a little longer. The next part of this story isn't about loss. It's about becoming, about how, after all the heartbreak, I learned to love again. Not another person, but the woman in the mirror. Because as I would soon learn, healing isn't the end of love. It's the continuation of it, just in a different form. There comes a time, my dear, when grief stops being a wound and becomes a room you've lived in for so long that you forget there's a door. For years I sat in that room, quietly, politely, as if waiting for someone to invite me out. I told myself I was fine, that I had made peace with it all. But peace, I've learned, isn't silence. It's movement. It's the gentle, trembling decision to keep living when the world has already ended once. One morning, I woke up and realized I hadn't opened the garden door in months. The roses had withered. The ivy had claimed the walls. It looked like time had moved on without me. I stood there, barefoot on the cold floor, staring out at the wildness that used to be my sanctuary. And then, without planning to, I stepped outside. The earth was damp beneath my feet, the air heavy with the scent of rain and forgotten things. The garden had grown unruly, wild and beautiful in its rebellion. It didn't need tending. It had learned to survive without me. As I walked among the overgrown roses, I realized something simple and devastating. I had spent so many years loving someone else that I had forgotten how to love the woman who'd been left behind. That afternoon, I found an old mirror in the shed, the kind with a wooden frame carved by hand, slightly cracked at the corner. I cleaned it, wiping away years of dust until my reflection appeared. I barely recognized her. Her eyes were softer now, but wiser. Her hair, silver and wild, framed a face that had known both joy and sorrow and survived them both. I touched the glass gently and whispered, "There you are." It sounds silly, doesn't it? Talking to yourself, but I think sometimes that's exactly what healing is. Learning to speak kindly to the reflection you once avoided. I decided to place the mirror in the garden, right beneath the old oak tree, where we used to sit and drink tea in the evenings. Every morning after that, I'd go outside, stand before it, and tell myself something I was learning to believe. You are enough. You are not too late. You are still beautiful. At first, it felt strange, forced, but slowly, the words began to feel like mine. My dear, tell me, have you ever had to rebuild yourself from pieces you didn't know how to fit together? Because that's what healing feels like. Not a triumph, but a quiet, stubborn act of becoming whole again. One afternoon, as I was pruning the roses, a young woman from the village stopped by. She was new to the neighborhood, newly married, I think. Her name was Claire. She had bright eyes and that restless energy youth carries before life teaches it to sit still. She admired the garden and said, "It must have taken you years to make it this beautiful." I smiled and said, "Oh, beauty doesn't come from what you plant, dear. It comes from what you survive." She laughed softly, not fully understanding. And why should she? Some truths need years to ripen. She began visiting often after that. We'd sit by the window, drink tea, and she'd tell me about her life, her husband, her worries, her dreams. I saw so much of my younger self in her. That same hope, that same fear of being not enough. One day she asked me, "Mrs. Ruth, how do you know when love is real?" I thought for a long moment before answering. "When it stays kind," I said. Love that is real doesn't make you smaller. It doesn't ask you to beg for peace. It makes you feel safe enough to be exactly who you are. She smiled, and her eyes softened. I hope I have that kind of love someday. I wanted to tell her that even if she didn't, she'd still be whole, that no one is ever too old or too broken to start again. But I didn't. Some lessons can't be given. They have to be lived. As the months passed, I began to live differently. I took walks again. I read poetry aloud to myself. I started baking the bread he used to love. Not because I missed him, but because I liked the way the house smelled when it came out of the oven. I stopped waiting for anyone to come home, because I already was. It's a quiet thing, this kind of freedom. It doesn't announce itself. It just slips in one day. Like morning light through an open curtain, sometimes I'd catch my reflection in that garden mirror and smile at her. That older woman who had once believed her story was over. She looked strong. She looked gentle. She looked Enough. And slowly the house began to feel different too. Not haunted, not lonely, just alive, like it had been waiting for me to return. Not the woman he left, but the woman I was always meant to become. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted everything in shades of amber, I sat by the window with my tea and whispered to the airs, "I'm not waiting anymore." And I swear, my dear, I could almost hear the house whisper back, "I know." It was early autumn when the photograph arrived. The postman had slipped it through the mail slot, the same way he always did. Letters, bills, the occasional catalogue I never ordered. But that morning, when I bent down to collect the mail, there was a small brown envelope among the rest. No return address. Just my name, written in handwriting I didn't recognize. Ruth Harland. Something about the way the letters curved, tender, deliberate, made my chest tighten. I stood there for a long while, holding it in my hand, feeling that old stirring of curiosity and fear. Inside there was no letter, no note, just a single photograph. It was old, black and white, faded at the edges, the kind of picture that carried the smell of dust and forgotten rooms. In it, there was a young man standing in front of an old seaside inn. Wind tousled his hair, and he was smiling, that soft, careless smile of someone who hasn't yet learned what it means to lose. I didn't need to look twice. I knew that smile. It was him, James, the man who had once promised to grow old with me, and instead grew old somewhere else. But the strangest thing wasn't the photograph itself. It was the date written faintly on the back. June 1989, the summer he left me. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. My hands trembled as I traced the edges of the picture. It couldn't be possible. I had burned all of his photographs years ago. Every reminder, every fragment of him. I'd watched the flames eat away at our memories, until only ashes remained. So where had this come from? That night, I barely slept. I kept the photo beside me on the nightstand, glancing at it in the dim light. He looked so young there, so alive. I wondered if he'd ever thought of me when that picture was taken, if he had any idea that years later, I'd still be here, trying to forget the sound of his name. My dear, have you ever had something you thought you'd buried come knocking on your door again? It's like seeing a ghost, only this one lives in your own heart. The next morning, curiosity won over fear. I walked to the village post office and asked the clerk if she remembered who'd sent the envelope. She shook her head but said, "It came from London, Mrs. Harland. No sender's mark, but it wasn't posted from far. London, that word alone carried 1,000 memories. Years ago, that was where he had gone. Chasing dreams, or perhaps chasing someone else's reflection. I never really knew. I only knew that one day he kissed my forehead and said, 'Don't wait up.' And I did, for years." That evening, as I sat by the fireplace, I held the photograph up against the light. There, barely visible, was a reflection in the inn's window behind him. A woman's silhouette. Not me. She was wearing a light-colored dress, her hair tied in a ribbon. I couldn't see her face, but the sight of her sent a tremor through me. Was this her? The woman he had left me for. It's a strange kind of pain. Not jealousy, but the quiet ache of knowing you were once someone's entire world. And then, you became just a chapter. They closed. I placed the photograph on the mantelpiece, beside an old vase of lavender. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I whispered, "Why now?" That night, I dreamed of the sea. I saw him standing there, on that same pier from the photograph, his back to me. The waves were wild, the sky heavy with storm. I called out his name. Once, twice, but he didn't turn. And then, in the dream, I saw myself, younger, watching him leave all over again. Only this time, there was no anger, just sadness. The kind that makes you understand why people run away from the things they love. When I woke, there were tears on my pillow. I decided then that I couldn't let the photograph sit there unanswered. I needed to know who had sent it, not because I wanted him back. Those days were gone. But because closure is a strange kind of hunger. It grows with time. So I wrote a letter. I kept it short. To whoever sent the photograph, thank you. Some memories hurt, but sometimes they also heal. If you knew James Harland, please write back. Ruth. I mailed it the next morning. Days passed, then weeks. No reply. But something changed in me after that. The garden felt quieter again, almost watchful. The mirror under the oak reflected, more than my face. It showed the past reaching for the present, gently, like a ghost brushing against the living. Then, one rainy afternoon, there was a knock on the door. A man stood there, mid-30s perhaps, drenched and trembling. He had James's eyes, not the same color, but the same softness around the edges. Mrs. Harland? He asked. Yes. He looked down for a moment, then pulled something from his coat pocket. Another photograph. This one newer. And this time, the woman in the frame was unmistakably me. Young, bright, laughing in a summer dress. I think this belongs to you, he said quietly. My father kept it all these years. My breath caught. Your father? He nodded. James Harland. He passed away 3 months ago. The room fell silent. The only sound was the rain against the windows. Soft, relentless. He told me his father had spoken of me often toward the end, that he had written letters he never sent, that he had kept my photograph in his wallet, creased and faded, until the day he died. I don't remember much after that. Just the way my hands shook as I held the picture, the way the years collapsed into a single heartbeat. He left me for someone younger, but even in the end, he had carried the woman I was, the one he left behind, inside his heart. And that, my dear, is the cruel mercy of love. Sometimes it returns, but far too late. Before the young man left, he looked around the old house and smiled softly. He used to say this place smelled like lavender, he said. I smiled back. It still does. After he left, I sat in the garden for hours, watching the rain wash over the roses. I thought about the years I'd spent mourning a man who had, in his own broken way, never stopped loving me. And for the first time in a very long while, I whispered to the wind, "It's all right now," and somehow, I felt that he heard me. I didn't know that grief could return in waves, even after you've learned to swim through it. For weeks after his son's visit, I found myself walking through the house differently. Slower, quieter, as if afraid to disturb the ghost that had begun to wake again. Every corner held a memory. Every sound, the creak of the floorboard, the ticking of the old clock, felt like a heartbeat from the past. He was gone, truly gone this time. And yet, for the first time in years, it didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like release. Then, one morning, I found a package by the front gate. No name, no letter, just a small box wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Inside, there were 7 envelopes, old and yellowed, each with my name written on the front in his handwriting. James Harland. I knew that slant of ink anywhere. My dear, have you ever held something that made your whole body remember? I hadn't seen that handwriting in decades. But the moment I did, my heart began to race the way it used to, when he'd slip little notes under my teacup, or leave me letters on the kitchen table before leaving for work. For a long while, I just sat there, staring at them. My fingers trembled as I touched the edges. afraid that opening them would make everything real again. But the heart, once stirred, doesn't rest until it's read its own story. So I began with the first one. My dearest Ruth, if you're reading this, it means I never found the courage to send it. I don't know how to begin, except to say that leaving you was never the plan. I told myself I was doing what was best for you, though deep down, I think I was only running from myself. You deserved more than a man half alive, haunted by his own shadows. The truth is, I met someone. She reminded me of you, the you I had when we were young. But she wasn't you, and I knew it every day. By the time I realized what I'd lost, it was too late to come back without breaking you twice. So I stayed away, convincing myself you were better off without me. But Ruth, not a single day has passed that I haven't thought of your hands, your laughter, the smell of lavender in your hair. I hope, wherever you are, you've found peace. J. I sat there for hours, reading those words over and over again, until the ink blurred through my tears. So he had loved me, still, in his own broken, cowardly way. I opened the second letter. Ruth, I walked past our old house today. The curtains were open, and I saw someone else sitting where you used to sit. For a moment, I wanted to knock, just to see if you'd still smile when you saw me. But I couldn't. Do you remember that summer evening we danced in the kitchen while the radio played that old Sinatra song? I keep hearing it everywhere I go. It's like the universe doesn't want me to forget. I don't deserve forgiveness, but if I could ask for one kindness, it would be this. Remember me not as the man who left, but as the fool who loved you too much to stay. I pressed the paper to my lips. He always had a way with words. Even when those words were made of regret, the next few letters were shorter, written in shaky handwriting, probably years later. I could see time tracing its lines through his words. One said, I saw your name in the newspaper last week. The charity you started for widows. You've always had that light in you, Ruth. I hope you know I still carry some of its warmth. Another read, I bought the same perfume once, lavender and rose. It reminded me of you, but I couldn't bear to wear it on anyone else. And then the sixth letter, written just a year before his death. My Ruth, I've been sick. The doctors say I don't have much time left, and I find myself dreaming of our garden again. The one you built with your hands, the one I walked away from. There's a mirror there, isn't there? You always said it helped you see what the world forgot. I hope, if you ever look into it, you still see the woman who was loved beyond reason, even if the man who loved her was too afraid to stay. If I could do it all again, I would walk through that garden gate and never leave. By the time I reached the seventh letter, the sun had already set. The room was bathed in that dim golden light that makes everything feel like memory. The last one was the smallest, and it was sealed with wax. I hesitated before opening it. My heart knew it would hurt, but it also knew I couldn't stop now. Ruth, my dearest, my forever. If someone ever delivers these to you, it means I am gone. Please know that I carried your name with me to the end. I kept your photograph in my wallet, not because I couldn't move on, but because I didn't want to. You were the beginning, the middle, and the part of me that never learned to end. If love has any truth to it, it's this. It survives even when the people who felt it do not. Forgive me, not because I deserve it, but because you deserve the peace that comes with it. Always yours, James. I held that last letter against my heart and cried until I couldn't breathe. It wasn't anger anymore, not grief, not longing, just an ache that was softer than before, like the tide, finally retreating after years of drowning the shore. He had loved me, not perfectly, not forever, but enough for me to finally let go. My dear, before I continue, If this story has touched your heart even a little, do subscribe and stay with me through the end. Some stories aren't told to hurt. They're told so hearts like ours can heal together. Forgiveness is a strange thing, my dear. People speak of it as though it's a gift we offer others. But I've come to believe it's really the mercy we offer ourselves. For years, I thought forgiving James would mean letting him off too easily, as if the pain he caused had to be guarded like a secret inheritance. But as I sat there, surrounded by his letters, I realized the weight I'd been carrying wasn't his anymore. It was mine. The morning after I read them all, I went to the garden. The air was cold, the kind that tastes like memory. The mirror under the oak tree was fogged from the night's dew. I wiped it gently with my sleeve, and for the first time in a long while, I spoke aloud, not to him, but to the reflection I'd been avoiding. You waited too long to forgive him, I said softly. And then, as the wind rustled through the leaves, I heard another voice, faint but certain. My own. No, I whispered back. I waited until I was ready. It was the first time I'd ever answered myself with kindness. I sat there on the old wooden bench, the one he built with. His hands all those years ago. The paint had chipped and the wood had cracked, but it still held me, as if it too remembered what it was made for. I thought of all the years I'd spent being angry, not just at him, but at myself, for not being enough, for being the woman who stayed behind, for aging into someone he might not have recognized anymore. But then I realized something I'd never allowed myself to see before. He had left me for someone younger, yes, but time, kind, patient time, had given me something youth could never hold, grace. I had become the woman he would have needed to stay. Not prettier, not softer, but steadier, rooted. You see, love in your 20s burns like fire, but love, when you've lived enough to understand loss, glows like embers. Quiet, enduring, impossible to extinguish. As the days passed, I began writing letters of my own, not to send, but to release. I wrote to the girl I used to be, the one who cried in the kitchen the night he left. I told her she was brave, that she didn't fail just because he walked away, that her worth was never measured by who chose to stay. Then I wrote to him. It wasn't long, just a few lines. James, I forgive you. Not because you asked, but because I've learned that love, even when it ends, still deserves peace. I folded it carefully and placed it inside the final letter he wrote me. Then I tied them all together with a ribbon and tucked them into the wooden box by my bedside. The same box that once held our wedding photographs. I didn't burn them. I couldn't. Some memories deserve to rest, not vanish. That evening, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window as the sun slipped behind the hills. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt full of laughter, pain, forgiveness, and the soft hum of a heart finally learning to be whole again. And for the first time in a very long while, I didn't see his ghost in every corner. I saw myself. I saw the woman who survived heartbreak and turned it into something beautiful. The woman who grew old gracefully, not because she was untouched by sorrow, but because she learned how to hold it gently. Sometimes I think that's what aging really is, the art of softening without breaking. My dear, before I continue, tell me something. Have you ever forgiven someone who never said they were sorry? I'd love to hear your story too, because sometimes sharing our scars helps others find the courage to heal theirs. That night, I went to bed early. I placed the letters beside me on the pillow, like an old friend I had finally made peace with. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dark. It's all right now, James. You can rest. and so can I. And just before sleep took me, I swear I felt a warmth in the room. Not the kind that comes from fire or blankets, but the kind that comes from letting go. When I woke in the morning, the sun was spilling through the window, and for the first time in decades, I didn't feel the heaviness of the past pressing down on my chest. I felt light, free, alive. Forgiveness hadn't erased the past. It had simply allowed me to live beyond it. And in that quiet English house filled with echoes and lavender, Grandma Ruth finally breathed again. You know, my dear, there comes a time when the heart stops breaking in loud ways. It no longer shatters. It simply sighs. The ache turns into something softer, almost tender, like the echo of a song you once knew by heart, but can't quite remember the words to anymore. That's where I am now, the place beyond pain, beyond anger, beyond wanting anything back. In the mornings, I wake before the sun. I make myself a cup of tea, strong, just the way I used to make it for him, and sit by the window. The world outside feels gentler now. Even the air carries a sort of forgiveness. There was a time when every sunrise reminded me of what I'd lost. Now it reminds me of everything I've kept. My strength, my stories, and the quiet dignity of surviving what was meant to break me. It's funny, isn't it? How we spend half our lives trying to hold on to people, and the other half learning how to let them go. Sometimes, when the light hits the garden just right, I see our reflections in that old mirror under the oak. Not the people we were, but the love that once was. It's not painful anymore. It's like watching a movie I've already cried through once, knowing it ends exactly as it should. I used to think healing meant forgetting, but I've learned that forgetting is just another kind of grief. True healing, my dear, is when the memory no longer owns you, when you can look at it and smile, even if your eyes still water a little. The village has changed so much over the years. Children I once baked cookies for are grown now, with children of their own. Sometimes they stop by, bringing me fresh bread or flowers from their gardens. They call me Grandma Ruth, even though we're not related by blood. That's what love does. It builds family out of strangers. One of them, a little girl named Lucy, asked me recently, "Grandma Ruth, were you ever in love?" I smiled and told her the truth. "Yes, darling. Once. It hurt, but it also taught me everything I know about the heart." She tilted her head, frowning in that innocent way children do. "Then why aren't you sad?" I told her, "Because love, even when it ends, gives you something to keep, a piece of who you were when you were brave enough to care." She seemed to think about that for a long time before saying, "I hope I love like that one day." And I looked at her bright eyes, her unspoiled hope, and whispered, "I hope you do too, but I also hope you learn to love yourself first." After she left, I sat for a long while, thinking about how much my heart had changed over the years. Once I would have given anything to turn back time, to stand again in that doorway the night he left and beg him to stay. But now, I think I would simply smile at him and say, "Go. You still have lessons to learn, and so do I." There's a peace that comes with age, not because we've stopped caring, but because we finally understand that not everything we lose is a tragedy. Some losses are simply the way life makes room for what's next. I often wonder what James would say if he could see me now. Would he recognize the woman I've become? Would he see that the love he broke ended up becoming the soil from which I grew? Perhaps he would smile, the way he used to when he was proud of something. Or maybe he would just sit quietly beside me, and we'd both understand that some apologies don't need words anymore. Every night before I go to bed, I open the window and let the cool air fill the room. It carries the scent of lavender and rain. the same scent that once filled our house when we were young. It reminds me that time isn't cruel. It's just honest. It takes, it teaches. And sometimes, if you're patient enough, it gives back a little softness too. And that, my dear, is how the heart forgets the hurt. Not by erasing it, but by outgrowing it. Before I continue, my dear, if this story has stayed with you even a little, do subscribe and stay close to my heart till the end. There's still something I want to tell you. Something about love that doesn't die, even when people do. You know, my dear, when you've lived as long as I have, time stops feeling like an enemy. It becomes a companion, an old friend who's seen you at your worst and still walks beside you. For years, I thought my story ended the night he left, but I was wrong. That was only the moment the story changed shape. Love never truly dies. It just finds a quieter place to live. Sometimes in an old photograph, sometimes in a scent or a song or a single whispered memory that visits you at dawn. Last winter, something strange happened. The postman brought a small brown envelope. No return address. Only my name written in the same cursive I once traced with my fingers on his love letters. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a faded photograph of the two of us, standing in front of the lake, young and foolish, and so desperately in love. On the back, written faintly, were the words, "If I had another lifetime, I'd still find you first." It was his handwriting, older, shakier, but his. There was no letter, no date, no explanation, just that one line. I don't know who sent it. Maybe it was him, before he passed. Maybe it was someone who found it among his things. Maybe it was fate's way of saying goodbye properly this time. I didn't cry. I smiled, because for the first time it didn't hurt. It felt like the world had closed a circle it once left open. That night, I took the photograph to the garden. The stars were sharp and cold, and the wind carried the smell of rain. I held that photo to my chest and whispered, "I forgive you, James." And I meant it. Every word. Forgiveness doesn't erase the pain. It just takes away its power to define you. It lets you walk lighter. It lets you breathe again. Sometimes I think he never stopped loving me. He just got lost. The way some souls do when they go looking for something newer, brighter, younger, only to realize what they were chasing was something they'd already had. But I've long stopped waiting for his ghost. I've made peace with the silence. I've made friends with the empty chair beside me. It no longer feels like loss. It feels like memory resting quietly beside love. There are nights when I still talk to him. I tell him about the roses that bloom every spring, about the children who visit, about how I still keep the curtains he once said made the house feel like home. I tell him that I no longer feel broken, that I'm proud of who I've become. A woman shaped not by the love that left, but by the strength that stayed. And if there's an afterlife, if souls do meet again, I hope he finds me by the lake. Not as the woman he left, but as the woman I grew into, wrinkled, wise, unafraid, and still capable of loving, even after everything. I often wonder if he ever told his young wife about me. Maybe he did. Maybe she heard my name in a story once. An old love that never really ended. Or maybe, when he looked at her, there were moments when he saw a shadow of me in her smile. That's how life works, doesn't it? We leave traces of ourselves in the hearts we touch, even when they move on. Now, as I sit here, the rain begins again, gentle, like a memory that knows it's welcome. The house creaks softly. The sound of age and stories that refuse to die. I close my eyes and let the rain speak to the windows, like it used to all those years ago. And in that moment, I feel him, not as a ghost, not as a regret, but as a warmth that still knows my name. You see, my dear, time doesn't steal love. It simply teaches it how to stay differently. Love that outlives time doesn't need hands to hold or lips to kiss. It just needs a heart brave enough to remember kindly. So, if ever someone leaves you for something they think is better, let them go. You don't lose by being left. You grow by surviving. And one day, when you look in the mirror, you'll realize you've become everything they were too blind to see. I am that woman now, older, softer, stronger, the one he always wanted, but too late to have, and somehow that's enough. Before I end, my dear, if this story touched your heart even a little, don't forget to subscribe and stay with me. These stories are all I have left to share, and knowing you listen makes this old house a little less quiet. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? It warms my heart to know how far my voice travels. And if you've ever loved and lost, know that love, in its truest form, never really leaves. It just changes rooms. Good night, my dear. Until the next story. Grandma Ruth.